Talking about our material for today. So our value is the same value as last week, but we should reiterate. What's our value?
Excellence through virtue.
Excellence through virtue. And what is excellence through virtue? And before we were looking at a different example of how this would work, but what it was our... What's the content of our, other than just the phrase? Remind me to get you guys on attendance before you leave.
Sure thing. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. I just don't want to mark you as unexcused absent, right? So what does that mean, excellence through virtue? You can start by reading it aloud if you want. Yeah, go
It
ahead.
means like kind of doing your best at something through like, I don't know, through like kind of God's eyes and like kind of like in a wholesome way.
Yes, it's doing your best. Yeah, so obviously the original content, because it's Benedictine law, is in a religious, specifically religious context of like, practicing virtuous things so that they become a habit, right? And we kind of looked at that with like, what was the way in which we were applying that last week? That virtue in an academic sense. What we were connecting it to is our habit of mind. You guys remember?
Thinking and communicating with clarity.
Yeah, so we're thinking and communicating with clarity, which we were talking about using precise words, right? We talked about things like disciplines having their own meta-languages, right? And us trying to be as precise. A lot of what college is learning how to be precise in your language, right? And then we read that reading about basically the dying out of natural language, some of the precision that multiple languages as well as within our own language, natural imagery is dying out, right? We talked about that. How's it being applied this week? What's our habit of mind this week?
Striving for accuracy and precision.
Yeah, striving for accuracy and precision. What do we mean by that? We no longer mean this linguistically. How are we meaning it?
Like doing really good work and like really working on getting things precise and to the right standards.
Yeah, it's to some degree there's all these, and within any discipline that you guys are going into, as well as the ones you're just sort of sticking your toes into across the curriculum, there are very clear standards within those disciplines on how you do them, right? And so there's very clear standards on what's expected of you in terms of playing an instrument, right? There's very clear standards on, what makes a good painting versus what doesn't, right? What are the good best practices of painting, right? They're very good for math. There's standards on how you do math. I don't know what they are, but they exist. So within my own discipline, there's a series of methodologies that when you study things, you're supposed to do. So in a lot of ways, what you learn in college is you learn how to actually in some ways, follow the rules to increase your precision, right? There's kind of an interesting, so I thought about ways we could connect this to larger literatures. So one thing not to throw more other language words on you, but what do we mean when we use the word science in English? Something worth being aware of. What do we mean by the word science in English, particularly as American English speakers? What is science?
The study of the natural world.
This is the study of the natural world. What makes science different than other things? Because you could study the natural world I could be a poet who writes about waterfalls. It's in some ways Robert Frost studied the natural world, but he wasn't a scientist, at least not by American English-speaking definitions of science.
Perhaps it's the scientific method.
So we often mean following a specific scientific method, right? And we often mean, even to some degree in English, we often need things that are more mathematical we think of as science, something that philosophers refer to as universal in the thesis. But anyways, like, so like we have a very specific definition, which means that like when we think about the curriculum as American English speakers, we will think of like, when you take a literature class, is that science to you guys? When you take a history class, is that science to you guys? Which is interesting because if you were European, you would have said yes, literature is a science. And this works both like, just like thought-wise, right? But it also works linguistically. So like, bringing another German word, the German word for science is Wissenschaft. And starts with a W, Wissenschaft, Wissenschaft. And Wissenschaft simply means to think about something concertedly and with precision. Right? So there is no division between like something being scientific by the basis of using one method versus scientific on the basis of using another. So like a literature person, if you're doing good literary analysis, right? If you're a good literary critic, and you use the set sort of standards of your discipline, you are Wissenschaftler, a scientist, right? You guys get kind of the idea? So like, if you think about how we're using this word and talking about precision, right? I think that brings that out better, right? Another good example of something for an image, right? There's a philosopher of science by the name of Henri Lakatos. And Henri Lakatos likes to talk about research projects or scientific communities. Right? And so for him, like any community that has a set rules for how you observe things, set rules for what counts as information and not as information, for Lakatos, he refers to that as a science, right? That's a scientific community. So things that we normally wouldn't think of as sciences, things like theology, for Lakatos very specifically, are sciences, right? So you think about that, like in some ways like college, and what you're here to do is you're here to get really precise about the things that you're doing. You're here to become a scientist, a Wissenschaftler, or Wissenschaftlerin. Make sense? So that's just the kind of like a framing thing, right? A way to think about it. And that kind of ties in with, let's look at that. So in our little like prompt for today, right? It starts out by talking about in traditional education, where do you see this learning of precision? This is that first paragraph, if you have it open. How do you see that precision in the original liberal arts, the trivium, which we talked about a long time ago? Just looking at you to look, you know the prompt, right? You guys have it up on your computers? What are they in the first paragraph? What are the different disciplines that are?
Arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy.
Yeah.
I think is what you're referring to.
Yeah. So traditionally that precision was taught through this handful of disciplines, right? So traditionally, like, regardless of what you were going into, you learned to be precise through the taking of things like math, music, right? Geometry and astronomy, right? Astronomy being sort of like the arch natural science of that era, right? Today, it works a little bit differently. You don't necessarily learn just to be precise in taking your math class, right? But in almost every single, and this is what that next paragraph is pointing out, right? That almost every time you guys take a class, regardless of its discipline, right? You're to some degree not just learning the content of that discipline, but you're learning its modes of analysis, its methods, right? So if you want to think about it like, and that's why I kind of started with that idea of Wissenschaftler, right? Or the scientific communities, right? So to some degree, like when you take history, you don't just learn the content of like, in 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue or whatever, right? Like, instead you're learning the modes of historical interpretation. You're learning how historians use their methods to understand the world around them. And that's essentially what all of them are. So when you learn psychology, you don't just learn about, and this was the example given in the text, right, the mind. You learn about how is it that psychologists go about understanding, right, the mind itself, right? Make sense? Cool. Okay. So we had two different examples. What were they for? What were our two extended examples for this week? The pyramids. And what do we see? What are we seeing in the pyramids? What's that first image before you? The pyramid itself. And what do you notice about the pyramid itself?
It's huge.
It's big.
It's very symmetrical.
Yeah. It's like it's in great condition for its age.
Yeah. So in a lot of ways, like what happens if you built something colossal and you did it without accuracy?
It'll fall apart.
It'd fall apart, right?
Short-lived.
What's that?
It'll be short-lived.
It'll be short-lived, right? Is anybody here ever interested in architecture at all? You are? Yeah, are you an architecture student?
No, I'm civil engineering.
So, yeah. Yeah, you'd definitely be interested in architecture. Do you know anything about postmodern architecture?
A little bit, yeah.
But do you want to share what you know, or not really?
Well, pretty much it's like, you're talking about the ones where they're like pretty much just trying to build glass boxes. They're
Yeah.
like kind of floating and kind of not floating.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
kind of, yeah, that's an example of it.
I mean, I think pretty much the idea is like really, really clean lines and really, really like precise, like really, really kind of tight tolerances on all of that. As opposed to like a traditional house where you've got kind of more of an organic feel, you've got like the curved roof, you've got, kind of curves built in.
Yeah.
And kind of warm, whereas postmodern, the focus is very much on sharp geometric shapes and like very, very clean, almost more inorganic lines than traditional architecture.
Yeah, all
As
those.
far as I know, I don't know that much.
No, those are all great examples of things that go into postmodern architecture. Postmodern architecture and being inorganic often doesn't really want to take into consideration natural things at all, right? So you think about like having if you think about those, I actually like when I first got here, houses are kind of like cheap in Atchison, but what you get is really run down, right? And so like when I bought a house, I was like, I'm just gonna buy one of those pre-made micro houses, like what they do out west, and I'm just gonna buy a farm field and just put like a glass box in a farm field, and that's what I'm gonna live in. I didn't do it, but I was shopping around for it, right? But like if you think about those glass boxes, right? In some ways they're kind of like, they're actually in some ways horribly impractical, right? Because like if you have a big glass box, what's one problem with that?
Sun.
You can break it.
It's hot, yeah, you could break all of those windows, right? Usually the windows are like super good glass, like they're really hard to break. They would last longer than I will. But what's another problem?
Privacy.
Well, that's what curtains are for. Maybe if somebody from a helicopter can see me taking a shower, but whatevs. If you're looking that hard, you have a problem. they're kind of like flat roofed, right? Right, which is like horrible long term wise, right? It would outlive me because like I'm a weak, fragile creature. But like, it wouldn't outlive if I had children. It wouldn't outlive, it wouldn't last, 30 or 40 years after my life. This definitely wouldn't last as long as the pyramids, right? And that's to some degree because to some degree, it often does things architecturally, which are pretty, but don't necessarily make a lot of sense. right? And that's actually kind of the point. It's supposed to be fun and playful, and like indoor and outdoor aren't separate and all these sort of weird things, but they fall apart very quickly because of that. When I was in graduate school, we were in a building called McClung Tower. And McClung Tower was basically like a giant tower, but then at the bottom it came down to a point, basically.
Wait.
And it was around an elevator, so it's built like this. Yeah, I'll draw it. Which there's a precision to this, so it's not to harass postmodern architects too much, but there's a precision to it as well. But so it was built like this, and then there was just some like four random beams that held up the
I
rest.
don't think they were
It just
random.
looks like a silo.
No, not
Yeah,
random.
what's the name of this building?
This was McClung Tower. This was at UT, University of Tennessee. And anyways, like it was built in the 70s, but it was already like very much so like falling apart. And they were actually, well, the year I left, the next year they were going to, and I haven't seen it since then, but they were going to build this exterior metal structure and then drill holes through the walls to hold it up and create like this, because it was already going to like topple over, because it's basically built like a log that somebody was chopping down with an axe. And that's what it looks like from a distance, right? Which is cool, but it's also like not super sound, right? Structurally. So like getting back to like any sort of like minor error in, so this is precise because it was intentional, right? But if you think about like the ramifications of building something, any little imprecision, essentially what happens in a building.
Things fall apart.
Yeah, things fall apart very quickly if they're not built very precisely, right? And so you think about like the precision that it takes to build something like that, right? So you see that in the bigger picture, right? Through these very clear lines, right? That what makes a pyramid so strong?
It's precision.
Strong
It's-
base.
Yeah, it's the precision of that triangle, right? It's that from those four things, right? Like the lines flow out equally. If you didn't have that, it would slowly topple, right? And fall apart. So bricks would fall away. Okay, so look at our next picture. Our next two pictures really in here. What do you guys see?
You see every individual brick that was laid.
What do you notice about that picture?
The blocks are huge.
Yeah, that's actually I think the point that's trying to be conveyed by the person who put that together, right? Blocks are absolutely huge. So to get that kind of precision on that scale, right, takes, in some ways, like it's a good display of it's a good display of the minds of those who designed it, right, in terms of their precision. If you go down to the next one, what do we see?
Just how accurate all the blocks are.
Yeah. How? I mean, that looks like.
It's like precise.
Yeah.
That's insane.
That's-
Yeah, like that. Like, that could be like your
Yeah.
bathtub, right?
Considering the
Like,
fact that like it was several millennia ago, and like the fact that the stonemasons were able to do that without taking absolutely forever to
I've
do
seen
it.
modern granite work that looks worse than that.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you go around how many of the buildings in town that were built 200 years ago look like that? Still.
None of them, but like,
Yeah, none of them really, right? They're all like topply.
right, but the houses around here aren't made of solid stone.
Yeah, it's fair.
Oh yeah.
So
Well,
There's actually
some
some
of them,
brick
because a lot of them
ones.
have
Some of them are
stone.
probably all brick.
Well, a lot
Because
of them.
they didn't start balloon frame, which is like the traditional studs,
Yeah.
until like 150 years ago or so. Like it's pretty recent. Before that, it was always log cabin or brick.
Most of the foundations here are stone, actually. They're Casota stone. If you start looking around. Sorry, they're not. No one else calls that Casota stone. It's limestone, sandstone. I think it's It's either sandstone or limestone. Sorry, regional dialect thing, right? So, in the northern part of the Midwest, you use the term Kasota stone for it because most of it came from the same quarry, which was in Kasota, Minnesota. So it's called Kasota stone. But, anyways, and then we have our last picture. What's our last picture of? The pyramids of Giza. Joseph is just getting together this accuracy.
What's a quarry?
Yeah, it's the quarry. You notice anything about the quarry? What is a quarry, first of all?
It's a place where people get stoned.
Yeah, it's the place you get stoned from, right? You notice anything about this quarry?
It's got little paths.
Yeah, what are the pads? Or more aptly, what were the pads before?
Probably so you could get properly square blocks just by like digging down, I guess.
Mhm.
I think those were the blocks. I'm pretty sure. So that's where they cut them from. And once again, you can see like the clear accuracy of that. A lot more accurate than a modern one even. If you ever driven past the quarry when you're traveling, right? Like, yeah, you don't get like that perfect like grid pattern, right? So like, what is it that made it stand so long, right? In some degree, it's it's an obvious connection, right? It's the habit of mind that we're often talking about. It's precision. You guys wanna? No. I'm just saying, like, talk to everybody.
Is the quarry from like the actual Egyptians, like when they built? Or is that more?
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be weird to put it up otherwise, I think.
I just physically can't comprehend how they can cut stone.
I'm often confused by the idea of cutting stone, anyways.
Yeah, I mean, like, 'cause
Really, why?
nowadays we like blow it up. Or like, that's like one of the ways.
No, we have
but-
like concrete saws and stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I'm like, what did they use?
Stone tools.
Like, did they literally just go at it with a hammer and a chisel?
Yeah.
That takes so long.
I'm trying through these. Let's see what SMC more necessary.
We could be really cynical about this and be like the reason why they were capable of doing that is because, you know, they just basically send it. Yeah, it was a combination of slavery and corvée labor.
Cool. Yeah, so moral of the story, slavery gets done.
Get stuff done. That's not the. Sorry, now I'm thinking like a sociologist, right? Do you guys know what corvée labor is? Has anybody ever heard of that?
No.
So like this was actually a really common form of taxation at one time that you would just basically be like, yeah, you work for 6 months for free. Hope you have enough food sitting around. And like the ancient Egyptians used massive. That's why they had so many massive projects. Is they didn't really have a currency system, so they almost all the form of taxation was in the form of corvée labor. So like it was a combination of slaves from people they conquered, and then like their own people who they were just like, yeah, 6 months in the quarry, guys. Work off your keep, you know. So it's a combination of precision of mind and sheer political power and the threat of violence. Sorry. Okay, so that's one of our examples. What was our other example?
It's a video.
The choir.
The band.
Orchestra.
The orchestra. And what was displayed in the orchestra?
That sometimes you can't settle for an egg. That you need to strive for 100%.
How did they convey that?
Like, because he was starting out with like just a normal A score is about a 90%, which was 5 mistakes for each person. So he had them play and each person made 5 mistakes and it sounded terrible. And then he was like, okay, let's do it with 3 mistakes. It sounded a little bit better, but it still sounded really bad. And then you showed the difference by having them play it perfectly and it sounded way better than anything they had done before.
Yeah, so in essence, it's an attempt to show, much like, in a lot of ways, you can think of it as the opposing case to the pyramid we looked at. The pyramid was a display of what is it that precision looks like, and what is it that precision can accomplish, precision and slavery. And Actually, usually, like, not to be like, anytime you see something that's big and grand and built well, there's usually some form of exploitation behind it. But, yeah.
Well, also, wasn't it like seen as like an honor to work on the pyramids? It's like it was like like a service to their gods or whatever.
Yeah, I mean,
To an extent, yeah.
Is this where like people are buried? Is that the-
Yeah, it's a tomb.
Oh, they used
That's
to, and
nice.
then people realized, oh wait, by burying people in these big tombs of pyramids, they become easy targets for robbers and gravediggers. You know what I'm trying to say.
which also, like, I mean, who are their gods? What's that?
Well, they like
The
believe that,
Egyptian gods?
Yeah, who are,
but they
well,
like believe that the pharaohs like were from
Yeah,
like
we're
gods.
yeah, so I mean,
Might be confusing to the pharaohs.
well, and whether your average person who is forced by the military to extract extract things from the quarry actually really believe that the pharaoh was a god, or if they just, there's no like real record of like what the average Egyptian thought, right?
And we figured out how to cut the stone too.
Oh yeah.
Apparently they'd like cut holes in it and then like stick wood wedges in there and then like soak the wood until it expanded and cracked the.
Oh, genius,
Yeah,
oh
it
my
was pretty
god.
big brain.
That's a huge flex.
I feel like if I lived in a different time period, I want to live then.
Become a slave in ancient Egypt.
I would go.
That would kind of be fun, not gonna lie.
That would be what?
That'd be kind of fun.
Be fun.
It just, it's an experience.
It'd be an experience, yeah.
Well, not an
We'd
adventure.
be experiencing excellence through virtue and precision.
If you want to experience slavery, it's possible today still.
Oh my goodness.
I'm dropping out and going into the slavery business.
If you think your parents are disappointed in you if you get a liberal arts degree, just wait. Okay. So getting back to the overarching point, I guess. You see, you guys are just getting to like the silly point of the semester, aren't you? Anyways, getting back to the central point, right? You could view them as sort of like opposing cases. In the one case, what we get is we get an example of precision, right? And the other case, what you're getting is you're getting the example of imprecision, right? So if we hold the two in contrast, right, you see that like very quickly imprecision becomes something, if you will, intolerable, right? On the other hand, like precision, if achieved, right, has this sort of like lasting continuity, and this is actually just something of an accomplishment. Okay, any other thoughts people want to share? This one's a little shorter because we don't have like a text like delve into, so if you have other thoughts you want to share on the topic of precision, or on the topic of pyramids, or bands, high school bands.
What?
Yeah.
So Google is exploding over here with evidence that slaves really did not build them.
Yeah, there's a debate about whether slaves, right, did exist or not. But even if there isn't slaves, there is still corvée labor. So like, so so either way it was built by free labor. The question is like, one, like, if you're forced by a king to work for free for taxation, is that
That's
slavery?
Technically slavery.
Right? So like there's a distinction in the fact that like, within slavery, right, like, well, and even like Egyptian slavery wasn't a perpetual state. You could work your way back out of slavery as well.
Like, yeah,
Wait,
Yeah.
corvée labor means that they worked for tax deductions, basically?
No, they worked because that was how they paid their taxes.
Yeah, so essentially